Today on Market Journal, we're sitting down with Nebraska Farm Bureau President Steve Nelson to get his take on some of the biggest issues impacting farmers today. Plus, with harvest coming to a close, our market analyst weighs in on how yields this season may impact livestock feed costs. And when the mercury falls, it's time to make plans for winterizing your farm's irrigation system. Hear what advice our expert has for you. This week's edition of Market Journal starts right now.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hey everybody, I'm Troy Moling, and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Thanksgiving is over, harvest is over, seems like everybody's gearing up for the holidays. In the meantime though, we've got lots to get to on today's show. Before our market analyst joins us, let's get a quick check of the monthly cattle on feed report. Cattle and calves on feed for feedlots with a capacity of 1,000 or more head totaled 11.7 million on November 1st. That's up 3% from a year ago. Feedlot placements totaled 2.25 million head, 6% below last year's numbers. Other disappearance totaled 69,000, which is down 5% from a year ago. Dr. Lee Schulz is a livestock economist with Iowa State University. He joins us now to give his take on the latest cattle on feed report, hogs, dairy, and a whole lot more. Lee, thanks for being here today.
Good to be here.
And starting off, the latest cattle on feed report came out just before Thanksgiving. What were some of the numbers that stuck out to you?
Well, I think overall you could view this report as a bit bullish when you look at especially the placement numbers. Now, the placement pre-report expectation was a very large range, ranged all the way from 94% of a year ago all the way up to 104%. It came in very much at that low end. 6.1% below year-ago levels. That placement number is a number we're really watching because that is the pipeline supplies of cattle as we get into the new year, especially when you look at February, March, April time period. You did see the futures react to that lower than expected number. And so I think when you look at overall, the cattle market really needed a bit of bullish news, and it got it as far as this cattle on feed report.
And looking like a nice harvest this year, are we seeing that carry over to feed costs?
Yes, feed costs are lower, but I think there is still a bit of uncertainty because of the delayed harvest, because of some potential quality issues out there. I think we won't really know the implications of this latest harvest on feed prices until we get several months into the future. What I am reminding producers is we have low feed costs. I think that presents an opportunity to provide a bit of certainty as we look at margins into the next year, and use of risk management, be it forward contracts or futures options, could help provide some certainty because these feed costs are relatively low.
And you mentioned 2019. I guess you would be of the opinion that you think the cattle market and the hog market is going to continue to grow?
I think it's all but certain. When you look at the inventory levels, record large inventories of hogs, really large inventories of cattle, at least in the current cattle cycle. And so that means increased production, at least for the next year or two. And so far, that production has been absorbed, both from the domestic market and the export market. But I think it's really the crux of it is going forward. Expectations, I think, of red meat and poultry production being up almost 6% in the next 5 years, but per capita consumption is likely to remain pretty flat. So what that means is we're going to rely on the export markets to absorb that additional production. If they continue to absorb that additional production, I think we have the potential to maintain prices where they're at, even though we're having higher supplies.
And I want to get your take on this. Representatives from the Iowa Pork Producers Association had some meetings in Japan and South Korea a couple weeks back, so probably as important as ever to make sure retailers over there are happy with U.S. pork, wouldn't you say?
That is the case, and I had the tremendous opportunity to join the Iowa pork producers on that meat trade mission. And the importance of those missions is really to give a face or a name to the U.S. product and really to nurture those relationships that we've built over time. It doesn't happen overnight that South Korea is our 4th largest export market for pork, likely to be number 3 pretty quickly, and beef is the 2nd largest market. Again, that doesn't happen overnight. It's part of these trade missions. It's part of trade policy that enables us to get that market access, and then probably more importantly is maintain that market access and continue to grow it.
What was your favorite part of the trip?
I think my favorite part of the trip is really twofold. It's one, to travel with the Iowa pork producers and really get to understand their operations and really what drives them in production, but then also see the other side of the market. A lot of times as analysts, we look at the numbers and understand the numbers from a year-over-year standpoint, but really don't maybe get why we've seen such increases in exports or why our market share has grown. And when you really get in a country and understand their culture and understand why they view U.S. beef and pork as such an important part of their market, that's why I think it really helps understand where we could potentially go as far as growing that market access.
Nice. That sounds like it was a lot of fun. As we wrap up, I wanted to get your take on the dairy industry and if you see any optimism as far as that goes for 2019.
I see a bit of optimism in that market. I think it is twofold. One, it's from a supply side situation. We are seeing lower cow numbers. You've seen increased dairy cow culling. You've seen fewer replacement heifers being held. And so I think that's going to start to curb the increased production we've seen as of late. But also with that, we've seen increased productivity as far as milk per cow. So it's not going to be as quick as maybe we anticipate, even though we're losing a few cow numbers. The strength in the market has really been the demand situation. We've really maintained demand, especially export market. They've gone at lower prices, but we're still continuing to push that additional production on the highest valued market. I see prices increasing about 5% potentially in 2019. I think one of the positives in the market is we're also seeing low feed costs. And so while we likely need higher and higher milk prices to see more profitable margins, at least we're controlling the cost side of things. And I think that provides a bit of optimism, at least in the short run.
All right. We always enjoy you being on the show, Lee. Thanks for your insight.
Thank you.
Next week, we'll be joined by Jeff Peterson from Heartland Farm Partners. We're going to have a wrap-up of the top ag stories for 2018, and we'll see if we can guess what 2019 has in store. Now, chances are you've heard of Nebraska Farm Bureau. You and your family may even be part of the organization's 60,000 members. Nebraska Farm Bureau's goal is simple: help make life better for farmers and ranchers through service, education, and legislation. Nebraska Farm Bureau President Steve Nelson joined me to explain more about the organization and some initiatives being worked on now.
It really has an interesting history, but most importantly, we have a very long history. This is our 101st year of Nebraska Farm Bureau here in the state of Nebraska. And the upcoming year in 2019 will be the 100th year for American Farm Bureau. We're also affiliated with American Farm Bureau. There are farm bureaus in all 50 states, along with Puerto Rico. In Nebraska, our history, of course, goes back over 100 years, and it really connects to the Extension Service or the Extension program. And at that time, there was a need to have a sponsoring organization for the Extension Service in each county, and that was the initial role that farm bureaus, county farm bureaus, performed and served that purpose to be the sponsoring organization for a county agent in each county. And so that's where history really began.
Okay, and so what do you see as some of the biggest issues that are impacting Nebraska farmers right now?
Sure. Well, I think the number one issue is the economy in general. We have very tight margins in everything that we grow and raise in the state of Nebraska, and so those tight margins affect how farmers and ranchers are not only able to survive and continue to produce food, not just for their families, but for the needs of people all around the world. But it's also about how they continue to sustain their business into the future. And so economy is number one, and a lot of the issues then that we talk about after that really affect the farm economy. Sure. We would have trade, a lot of issues surrounding trade. Taxes are very important, certainly here in Nebraska. We have an over-reliance on property tax that we've been dealing with for some time, and so that's an important issue. Water is always extremely important in the state of Nebraska because of our climate and the relatively low amount of rainfall that we get throughout the year. So there's just lots of things that are out there. One other thing that I should mention is broadband. There are a lot of issues with related to rural broadband today, not only for farmers and ranchers to be able to take advantage of the technologies that are available today, but also it affects the way of life in rural areas, and for young people wanting to come back to the farm or ranch, or wanting to have some kind of business on the farm or ranch or in a rural area without good broadband service. It makes some of those things just impossible, and so that's another area that's very important.
And what are some of the other goals that Farm Bureau is working on as we head into 2019?
Sure. Well, our number one policy-related goal from a state standpoint, at least, would be to find property tax relief and to have property tax reform. Farmers and ranchers are particularly affected by high property taxes and by the load that property tax carries in funding education here in the state of Nebraska, because agriculture is land intensive. It takes land to be in the farming and ranching business, and so while property taxes are high for everyone, farmers and ranchers have been particularly affected by this, and we've been working on this for a number of years. It's probably always been an issue, at least in the last generation or two. It's been an issue, but the problem has continued to get worse, and so we continue to work to find solutions with the state legislature. So that's probably our number one state issue. Of course, broadband I mentioned before, and then probably at the national level, of course, there's the discussion related to the Farm Bill and the importance of getting the Farm Bill passed on time, to maintain crop insurance in the Farm Bill, those things that probably most everyone is aware of and you've probably talked about before. I think then the other area that we know is so important, it relates to trade. About a third of everything that we grow and raise in Nebraska comes from trade, as from a gross revenue perspective, comes from trade. Different commodities would be slightly different than that, but it's clear that trade is extremely important to farmers and ranchers in the state of Nebraska. And as we've seen over the years, that whenever agriculture is doing well in the state, the rest of the state does well, and so it's important to the entire state of Nebraska. And so we continue to work with the administration to make sure that we have good trade deals, that we continue to wrap up trade discussions that are there. But that is something that's very important to the future of farming and ranching as well.
And annual meetings coming up too, right?
Yes, that's right. So in the first week of December, we have our annual meeting. That's a normal time of year, and that's when we come together to really culminate that policy development process. We also do some educational seminars during the annual meeting. We elect the board of directors there. The delegates do that, and again, as I said, our board is made up of farmers and ranchers who are elected by those delegates, so that's a very important part of what we do as well. And so lots of good discussions about policy there.
We'll have part 2 of our interview with Steve next week. He'll talk about his role as president and what he thinks makes farming in Nebraska so unique. Short, tall, wild, or contained, the one thing weeds have in common is that you don't want them in your fields. And with a multitude of different varieties in Nebraska, weeds are a big deal for lots of people. That was evident by the large turnout at the recent Nebraska Extension Weed Science School. Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh was there and has this report.
Every farmer's dream is to see their fields blooming with the seeds they sowed. In reality, alongside the crops, there will most likely be some unwanted weeds sprouting throughout the season. In order to prevent these weeds from becoming a problem, producers need to know how to manage them. That's where Amit Jala's Weed School comes in.
Today we have organized Nebraska Extension Weed Science School. It's a one-day seminar to deliver message about number of topics in weed science. For example, how to control glyphosate-resistant weeds, plus how to reduce off-target dicamba by injury issues, and some other interesting topics.
The Weed School, held at the Eastern Nebraska Research and Extension Center near Mead, featured many speakers who gave presentations on a variety of subjects, from research to industry-related practices.
Well, I manage a program that's a regulatory program. We regulate most aspects of pesticides in the state. We also handle fertilizer quality assurance. When someone's got a field of soybeans or a specialty crop or a sensitive site, say for instance a vineyard, and they see unusual plant leaf symptoms, they frequently will either call the University of Nebraska's plant diagnostics lab, or they may call us and ask us to send an inspector out to investigate what they probably believe is herbicide damage to that crop.
After a hearty and filling lunch, the class got their hands dirty. With a piece of paper and a pen, they took turns identifying a variety of weed species so they'd know what to look for in their fields.
The idea to bring those weed samples here is just to let stakeholders to identify those weeds, and we will help them how best they can improve their skill to identify weeds. So we have about 42 weed species, including about 30 broadleaf weeds and 12 grass weeds in the sample, and those are the most commonly found weeds in corn and soybean cropping systems. Plus we have some winter annual weeds in the sample. So our idea is you have to know your weed better if you want to control them better.
At the end of the day, participants walked away with not only more weed knowledge, but sources they could go to with questions as well. This is exactly what Kevin Bradley from the University of Missouri is happy to find when he speaks at these kinds of events.
See a lot of questions, a lot of participation. I could barely get off the stage. There's people continuously asking me questions. So that tells you there's a thirst for knowledge. And we certainly want to, I mean, that's what our job is, right? I mean, like, that's why I do what I do. I want people to ask questions and to get the knowledge that we've gathered out in the field. And so extending those research-based results to the clientele, this is the best avenue for that to happen. And everybody's crunched for time and everything, but these people here today have said, you know what, even in the midst of harvest and everything else I got going on, this is worth it to me to come here because I'm going to get something out of it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here. So that speaks volumes.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
Thanks, Maddie. Moving on now from weeds to winterization, and as harvest ends and the temperatures cool down, it's that time of year to make sure your center pivot irrigation system is ready for winter and next year's growing season. University of Nebraska's Troy Ingram stopped by to give us some reminders on what can be done now to save yourself the hassle down the road.
Well, it's important because these are an expensive piece of equipment that we've got sitting out in the field, a very important piece of equipment, especially in Nebraska. We are the #1 irrigated state in the United States, so we do have a lot of irrigation. So it's good that producers can get out there after harvest and take a look at these pieces of equipment while they've got some time, possibly.
So in regards to harvest, when should this winterization be done?
Well, right after harvest is as good a time as any to perform this because the crops are out. The guys might have a little bit of time post-harvest to look at this piece of equipment. Some of the things that they may have had trouble with during the season still fresh in their minds. They can address those issues at that time.
Could you take us step-by-step through the process of winterizing the system?
Well, one of the first things that I like to do is get those pivot tracks filled. Get them filled in the fall. That way they've got all winter to sit there and hopefully firm up a little bit. It also gets that pivot out of those tracks because we do have expansion and contraction that happens within that system with the changing of the temperatures, and that can put stress on the system. So we want to park it outside of those pivot tracks if we can. And then we kind of want to go through the system piece by piece, look at the drivetrain, drain the water off the gearboxes. This is important in the fall because we want to get fresh oil put in those gearboxes to cover the gears and bearings so that condensation doesn't start to form rust on those internal parts. Once we get that done, we want to take a look at the tires, the knuckles, make sure we've got proper air pressure in those tires. And then we can go on and go through the rest of the system. If you're on canal water or have water quality issues, we want to make sure that system's flushed out good. Pull the end caps off, drain the sand traps, make sure the mid drains are working correctly, just so all the water gets out of that system.
And as far as security, what should be done in regards to the pivot?
Well, we want to make sure that the power's turned off to that pivot, make sure the panel boxes are locked out if you can, just to make sure that nobody can get at it, and turn this system on during freezing temperatures. That could actually ice up that center pivot and then possibly tear it down. So just another very important consideration.
And if you have cattle grazing in your field, is there anything different you should do?
Well, not other than protecting the system. We want to make sure that we don't have access for those cattle to get up in there and rub on the system. You know, they can do some damage if they do.
And what else should people do with their pivots to get them ready for winter?
Well, a lot of guys in Nebraska chemigate, so they put a plug on that panel box, and that opens that panel box up for rodents to get in there. So you want to make sure the panel boxes are secure, make sure, you know, we can't get rodents in there to do, you know, damage over the winter time, which they can do.
Most definitely. And where else can people go for more information?
They can go for more information. They can talk to one of their local extension offices. We've got a host of NEB guides addressing center pivot issues. And we've also got several educators out there that specialize in ag water, so they're all good resources.
Thanks to Troy for coming on the show. As I always say, you can never have too many Troys around. Okay, moving on now, and harvest time is harvest time no matter the crop. If harvesting corn or soybeans, you're concerned about moisture content and maturity, along with any weeds and diseases that nagged your crop throughout the growing season. If you're growing commercial hops, it isn't all that different. Nebraska farmers stopped by Nebraska hop yards near Plattsmouth recently to visit with Annette Wiles about the hop farm she and her husband Bruce own and operate. Read about hop production and the state's growing hop industry in the December Nebraska Farmer. It's time now for weather with Nebraska Extension ag climatologist and Market Journal chief meteorologist Al Dutcher. And Al, I guess we couldn't end November before getting one more blast of cold air and snow. How's the forecast shaping up for the first week of December?
Well, Troy, you're absolutely correct. We're going to end this month off again with some more cold air just as it started to move in there this weekend. That sets the stage up for this storm that's moving across the state, and we're going to see a wild variety of weather today, and it's going to continue through tonight and for the southern part of the state, probably all for most of the day tomorrow. Unfortunately, this has been a trend that has been pretty much consistent for the last month to 6 weeks, where we've seen these storms come in over the weekend to see benign conditions during much of the week. And in fact, if you look at southern Nebraska, particularly in south central and extreme southeastern Nebraska, there are several locations already that have exceeded last year's snowfall totals, and we haven't even made it through basically the month of November, and we're just starting to enter the month of December. So it looks like we are probably on our way to an above normal snow season, at least especially south of Interstate 80. Now, depending on how much snow falls here in the next 24 to 36 hours, we could see some significant increases in our seasonal snowfall totals, such that we'll be well over 15 inches in many locations. So as we go to the upper air models, the first thing I'll draw your attention is here's the upper air low circulation, and we got the big deep trough. So we got the cold air to the north, we got a big strong jet to the south that's going to lift moisture up from the south with this low pressure system in Illinois and also back toward the Texas Panhandle. That's going to push that moisture up over, and you can see very heavy precipitation to our east. To the west, we'll be starting this out today in southeast Nebraska as a rain-snow mix, but we should change over to all snow across the state as that trough remains pretty stationary for the next 24 hours, and a series of low-pressure systems rides along it. That's going to keep that moisture feed coming over top of the cold air, continue the snowfall. We should see the heaviest of snowfall totals drop toward the southern part of the state and then exiting as we get to the day on Tuesday. But on Monday, we'll start to see that low pressure system start to move its way toward the east as high pressure builds in. We're probably going to still stay under cloudy conditions, and we're likely to see some flurry activity, but I don't think we're going to see much in the way of significant snowfall accumulations. That will occur to the east of us. And as we get on the day Tuesday, we'll start to see that trough weakening somewhat, and we start to see some ridging trying to build up in the west. We'll still be under the influence of cool high pressure, but it's not going to be Arctic high. We're still going to stay highs mainly in the 20s, and we have this big storm system that's going to start approaching the western United States. In the meantime, we're going to start to see this ridge building up and bringing some little warmer air into our region, particularly as we get the second half of the week as that high pressure system starts to slide off to the southeast and bringing some return flow back from the south. And then we see that precipitation shield moving into Southern California. And the good news is that, at least from the model standpoint, with this trough in place over the Great Lakes, most of the activity is going to move south of Nebraska with this high pressure system firmly in place. So we look to be a fairly dry forecast, fortunately. The only fly in this ointment is, as we watch this precipitation shield move out, is whether or not it's going to slightly shift toward the north. And right now the models say no, it's going to stay to our south with the northern periphery of this just touching southeastern Nebraska as high pressure shifts off to the east. That brings that moisture up toward the north, but it basically gets cut off just about the Nebraska border. So if we see this move up a little bit farther toward the north, would not be surprised to see some snowfall accumulations occur late next week, particularly south of the Interstate 80 corridor. So pay attention to this system because it very well may bring some very inclement weather to our region. 8 to 14-day forecast starts to shift that cold air off toward the east. So we are seeing the impacts of this, the high pressure system late in the week starting to move off, and that'll start to relax some of the colder temperatures. And in terms of precipitation, we start to see the signs of a drier trend that may hold at least through the 14th of the month.
Thanks, Al. Before we go, the annual Nebraska Power Farming Show is coming up. It's the second largest indoor farm show in the U.S. with over 700 exhibitors. It's going to be lots of fun, and Market Journal will be there. So if you're going to be at the show, stop by our booth, say hello, grab a free gift. I'd love to meet you. The show is December 4th through the 6th at the Lancaster Event Center in Lincoln. That's going to do it for today's show. Hope to see you right back here next time. Until then, I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.